Alright everyone, in this video I'm going to be breaking down Irredeemable Volume 9, but before I dive into that, I want to go through some viewer comments from Volume 8, because there was a lot of interesting things that went down in that video. So one comment was about how Elliot, Scylla, and Carrie are basically a parody of the Summers brothers from the X-Men. Carrie's like Vulcan, Scylla's like Cyclops, and Elliot is like Havoc. And I gotta say, there is some kind of truth to this comment. They do kind of match up a little bit. There's another comment on Plutonian's motivation. One of my biggest concerns about Plutonian is his motivation. Maybe that is part of the charm of the character, because he is written as that's a character flaw, but what's his agency? What is his endgame? And you know, that is interesting to debate about Plutonian. What is his goal? He can now basically do and have everything he wants, so what does he want? And I don't even think Plutonian himself really knows what he wants, and that is something he is struggling with, so I find it pretty interesting. Another comment, or many comments rather, is criticisms of the writing of Carrie. So, going through some of these, the main character's powers are not fleshed out properly. Carrie was a legitimate threat to Tony, and was able to go toe-to-toe with him, even get the better of him at times. So why was Carrie almost nervous to fight him, Plutonian, when he showed back up? And then Gilgamesh just stabbed him with a sword and killed him? Just like that? Just doesn't add up. How has Carrie presented as a bigger threat than Tony when Tony has an uncountable worldly body count? I still don't see how Carrie was worse than Plutonian. And this is the worst volume yet, honestly. Everything felt so thrown in, no build-up, no anything, just random things happening. Triplets? And then the power source is killed? Yeah, 3 out of 10. And I gotta say, there is some definite truth to some of these criticisms on Carrie. He was kind of portrayed as this huge threat, so powerful, Plutonian's equal, and then he gets killed by Gilgamesh like it's nothing, and all that build-up kind of went nowhere. It just doesn't really make sense. And a lot of people are kind of bothered by the writing of him, and I totally get it. Now, some comments on Plutonian's parents' reveal. We learn those creatures with the weird head are actually Plutonian's mom and dad, and some of the reactions to that are the oldest plot twists. I am your father, which of course from Star Wars, Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. What a cliffhanger. How can I last a week now after that? There is parents? Bro, the second the two giants came out, I was like, that's his freaking parents. Mom and dad about to be like, boy, you getting grounded. And I love the reveal music. So, yeah, that reveal music I do. The one that goes like this. We are your birth parents. I freaking love that sound. I think it's so funny. The first time I used it was in the Boys series I covered, when there was a big reveal with Black Noir in that series, and I played that sound. And I've used it a bit in a few of my videos, because it just amuses me so much as like this soap opera dramatic kind of reveal. Now, a lot of the other comments were also people asking me to cover other comic series. So Fables, I think, is one I get asked the most to cover, and I absolutely love Fables. It's one of my top 10 comics ever, so I do want to get to that one day. 100 Bullets by Brian Azzarello is another popular one I get asked to cover. Great series, I recommend checking that out. Hellblazer, John Constantine, as well as Lucifer and more Sandman books are also something I get asked to cover, especially after my Sandman coverage. A lot of people want me to return to Mark Millar's books, Empress, Jupiter's Legacy Requiem, which is the sequel to the Jupiter's Legacy books, which is not finished yet, so I do plan on returning to Jupiter's Legacy Requiem once that does wrap up. And American Jesus Volume 3 is something I get asked to cover frequently. American Jesus was a pretty great series I covered that kind of was way better than I expected. And a lot of you want to see the conclusion to that, which will be in Volume 3. Although, you gotta know, it's not even published yet, so stop asking me to cover it when it's not. I can't cover it. It's not written. But I will get to it once it does finish. Now, a lot of you have also asked me to cover Incorruptible. which is the sister series to Irredeemable. Now, in this Volume 9 video, I am going to do a brief explainer on Incorruptible and what's been going on in that book, because this volume crosses over with Incorruptible. Now, we are going to get 2 issues of Incorruptible in this video, and we're going to see a fight between Max Damage, the main character in Incorruptible, and Plutonian, so we're going to get to see them go at it. So, I will be covering it a little bit in this video, but I am not planning on covering the entire Incorruptible series because I really want to just move on once I'm done Irredeemable. Also, Incorruptible is 7 volumes long, which would take me about 2 months to cover, and I don't want to devote that much time to it. But yeah, let's dive into the story for Volume 9. We will see Plutonian's origin with his crazy, weird-looking parents. We will learn Max Damage's origin from Incorruptible, and we will see both of these characters collide and fight each other, so it will be a good time. Now, before I dive into the bulk of the story, I have prepared about a 5-minute or so breakdown of Incorruptible to sort of catch you all up to speed, so let's dive into that first. Irredeemable, Volume 9, written by Mark Waid and art by Diego Barreto and Marcio Takera. Like I said in my introduction, before we dive into this volume, I really have to give you a brief overview of Incorruptible, the book that Irredeemable is going to be crossing over with this volume. So, Incorruptible is the sister book to Irredeemable. Around issue 9 of Irredeemable is when Incorruptible started publishing, and they were published together. And the stories kind of happened in parallel with one another, although they rarely actually cross over with one another. Here is a suggested reading order if you were going to try and read both Irredeemable and Incorruptible at the same time and wanted to read the trade paperbacks. Alternatively, you could just read Irredeemable and then read Incorruptible as well. Now, Irredeemable is about the world's greatest hero, the Plutonian, turning bad, whereas Incorruptible is about one of the world's greatest bad guys, in this case a man named Max Damage, and him turning good. I find Incorruptible to be really kind of optional and not necessary if you want to read and enjoy Irredeemable. You could read absolutely zero Incorruptible and Irredeemable will be a complete story. However, Incorruptible, on the other hand, constantly references what is going on in Irredeemable and is affected by things going on in it, so it is not worth reading Incorruptible if you are not reading Irredeemable as well, as there will be lots of holes in the story. The 2 books, they are running in parallel with one another, but don't really cross over much. It is much more like 2 separate stories occupying the same world, and a few characters might appear in both books a bit. Now, Incorruptible stars a character named Max Damage, whose real name is Evan Cousins. Max, or Evan, used to be one of the world's greatest villains. He was one of Plutonian's main enemies. Max Damage, he would kill and steal and do all sorts of heinous crimes. Max was particularly ruthless. He likely would have sold out his own grandmother to make a little cash. But when Plutonian, the world's greatest hero, went evil, Max Damage, one of the world's greatest villains, decided to become a superhero. He did a complete 180 and began fighting for good, although it took some adjusting. Max Damage possesses superhuman strength and resistance to physical damage, and these abilities get stronger based on how long he is awake. The longer he remains awake, the stronger and tougher his body becomes. His abilities allow him to go for days on end without sleep, but the downside is that his mind eventually suffers from severe sleep deprivation, and he starts going a little crazy and he must sleep to avoid it. When Max sleeps, his abilities reset. In fact, when he just wakes up from sleep, it takes about an hour or so for his abilities to start and kick in. So he is really vulnerable during that time. But when his powers do kick in, he loses his sense of touch, smell, and taste. Max Damage, because he's a bad guy, has a 16-year-old girl accomplice named Terry, who goes by the name Jailbait, which is totally politically incorrect. Jailbait has no powers, she is underage and dresses inappropriately super sexy for her age. She is called Jailbait because I guess if any men over the age of 18 were to get with her sexually, they would be arrested and go to jail because she is a minor. What was Mark Waid thinking with this character? Jailbait and Max started out as accomplices in crime, but when Max went good, she became his superhero sidekick. She idolizes Max and wants to get with him, but Max avoids getting with her sexually because, of course, she is underage. Max Damage, in an effort to go good, went on various adventures in his own series, Incorruptible. Most of these adventures involve him trying to stop some sort of bad guys from doing bad things and seeing him adjust to being a good guy now. All while the world around him is being affected by what's going on in the main Irredeemable series. Over the course of various issues of Incorruptible, Max Damage at some point eventually teams up with Plutonian's ex-girlfriend, Alana Patel. Alana is one of the main side characters in Incorruptible, and Alana and Max, they team up and try and do some good. That is kind of the background knowledge of Incorruptible and Max Damage and his world that you should know heading into Irredeemable Volume 9. So now, let's dive into the story with Irredeemable issue 32. Picking up on the big cliffhanger we saw last issue in Irredeemable, Plutonian is fighting these two ginormous creatures who claim to be his birth parents. Plutonian, he is fighting his parents, but he is no match for them. Plutonian's parents transport Plutonian to the end of time and existence, intending to leave him there. They explain that we are many solar cycles in the future, the very end of time, the heat death of the universe, where all activity has ceased. Entropy has drained all molecules, even yours, of their ability to move. All is cold. No stars still burn, no life exists. All that remains is a random scattering of leptons and photons, and even they will fade. This is your prison. Farewell. Plutonian does not want to be left here by his parents. He begs for answers, and he begs to know how he came to be. He asks, "Why am I?" Plutonian's parents, they will answer their son, and they will show him. Plutonian's parents bring Plutonian with them to a place called the Realm of Origin, where they can transport Plutonian across space-time and show him his origin. Plutonian's parents explain that they are a race of interdimensional beings called Ilios, and their job is to explore and record universes. They were on a mission to Earth years prior, and they found humans to be very interesting, so they sacrificed a part of themselves to create a probe that would explore humanity. That probe was basically Plutonian. So their probe traveled and was eventually drawn to a human woman who was wholly consumed with emotion after just killing her child, and she desired redemption. So powerful was this lonely woman's yearning that in that moment, it eclipsed the needs of any other life form for hundreds of miles. So strong was it that the probe, unprepared for such empathetic onslaught, found itself physically imprinted by its force, transformed by it, literally reshaped by the power of this woman's will. The probe that these two Ilios aliens sent transformed into an infant for this woman, and she raised him. But this woman, this mother, was insane. She killed her previous baby after all. She considered Plutonian a gift from her god, a miracle baby that erased her sins. And whenever she held Plutonian, she could pretend that her moment of madness, killing her previous child, had never happened. although the insane woman in moments of weakness would actually try and kill baby Plutonian again and again, subconsciously sometimes and sometimes consciously. Baby Plutonian, of course, was too powerful and would not die. Baby Plutonian was crawling on a hot oven. The woman, she would feed him rat poison, and Plutonian would eat it and he would live no problem. She tried to burn Plutonian by pouring gasoline on him, but it just tickled him. Finally, she went into her garage with her baby there. She kept the garage door closed and turned on her car, attempting to kill herself and Plutonian with carbon monoxide poisoning. The woman died, but Plutonian lived. Then Plutonian went through a string of adoptions in various foster homes. Although the foster parents would all eventually grow to be scared of Plutonian and his powers. Eventually, after all of these bad stints in foster homes, Plutonian, he flew out on his own as a young boy, and he lived in the city of Coleville, which is home of incorruptible lead character Max Damage. Plutonian, he would live in the forests outside Coleville. He would fly around the forest at night, and hunters would spot him, and he would kill various animals and whatnot, and eventually he became a kind of local legend in the community. People would refer to him as a wolf boy. At some point in those forests, Max Damage, who was a very ambitious teenager, he tried to ambush Plutonian, or Wolf Boy. Max tried to capture him in a way, but Plutonian was obviously too strong for Max and easily tossed him aside. He tossed him to the ground and threw boulders at him, and Max Damage really got very injured as a boy then. Plutonian explains his thoughts he felt that night to his parents. Plutonian says that that night, Max was everybody who had ever looked at him with fear in their eyes, so he decided to give them all something to be afraid of. He didn't care how vulnerable Max looked. He didn't even really notice. All the things that his eyes could see and do, all they saw that night was red. This was Plutonian's first act of unrestrained anger in his life, which would later take him over as an adult. However, back then though, after this incident, this Wolf Boy incident with Max Damage, Plutonian, he kind of felt shame. And he returned back to society, and he tried to be good, and he got adopted by another foster family. And he sort of lived on the straight and narrow for a little bit after that. More on that next issue though. Plutonian, talking to his parents now, he tells them, "I blame you. You allowed me to be made in the image of a broken human. It was her sickness that gave me form. I hope you're happy." Irredeemable, issue 33. Plutonian and his parents argued a bit, but Plutonian's parents' power easily surpasses that of Plutonian, and they show a demonstration of their superior power to him, and Plutonian, he calms himself down and he tells them that, "I accept your discipline. It's not something I've ever experienced before, being shown the back of someone's hand, being controlled." Plutonian's parents continue telling some history. So when Plutonian's parents came to Earth, they were observing the world, but the world was also observing them. The greatest minds in the world developed a method to create and manipulate a massive and lethal radioactive field. Without warning and without provocation or communication, Plutonian's parents were blanketed with this radiation, and they found themselves trapped. Plutonian, confused, asks his parents, "I bathe in radiation to relax. Surely you could free yourselves." Plutonian's parents explain that they could have escaped. They could have left at any time, but not without breaking the radioactive containment shield they were in and releasing devastating radiation across the planet. So they let themselves be trapped. And over the decades, world governments secretly constructed a maintenance facility on the island that they were trapped on. And Plutonian's parents would talk to the guards on the island, and through them, they would learn of their son's deeds, both good and bad. Plutonian's parents lived there for many, many years, so this explains to us how they got in the location that they were in. Eventually, though, the situation with Plutonian got so bad, the world decided that they had to get rid of the containment field, even if it meant releasing radiation across the world, but they had to do so that Plutonian's parents could deal with their son. Now the origin story returns to Plutonian, and we learn where his notion of the greater good got developed, and why he became this superhero, and why he put others' needs before his own for so long. So, after Plutonian left Colville, left being the Wolf Boy, he was adopted by a man named Bill Hartigan and his wife Irene Hartigan. These are the one set of parents Plutonian seemed to actually kind of like. Sort of like his Ma and Pa Kent from Superman comics. Plutonian would even take their last name and become Daniel Hartigan, which would be his civilian identity for many, many years. Bill Hartigan established discipline in young Plutonian's life and set him on a more just path. Unlike most of the parents Plutonian had, Bill Hartigan was one of the few who seemed more excited than scared about how different Plutonian was with his powers. Bill Hartigan was a good, generous man, even when it hurt him to be so, and he would teach Plutonian to be good and to sacrifice his own enjoyment and happiness to do so. He kind of established the Boy Scout way Plutonian would live his life for the next several years, until of course Plutonian snapped. We see a few examples of Bill teaching Plutonian to be good, to maybe a little bit of a ridiculous extent. One evening, Bill and Irene were eating pie, and Bill would not let Plutonian eat any. Irene asked Bill, "Why can't he have pie?" And Bill answered, "Because his father says so, Irene, and you'd better eat some. This isn't a group lesson. A boy who can take anything has to learn not to want what he doesn't absolutely need. With power like his, he's got to know all the way down to his bones that others always come first." Another evening on Christmas, little Plutonian opened all of his presents and he really liked them. But then Bill told little Plutonian, "You're welcome. Now wrap them back up, and when you're done, you and I are driving over to the hospital to donate these toys. That's what's really under this tree, son. The spirit of Christmas. Others first. You'll thank me someday." If my parents did that to me, I'd become a supervillain for sure. That Christmas night, though, Plutonian was in his bedroom, and with his super hearing, he could overhear his dad complaining, saying, "Lousy ingrates at that hospital. I can't believe they weren't more grateful. Isn't it always that way? No matter what you do, it's never enough." This is very interesting. This kind of mirrors to us the way that Plutonian in the future would come to resent most of the world for not being grateful for all he has done for them. Just like his dad was not satisfied with how grateful the hospital was for the toys being donated to them. Several years later, when Plutonian was heading off to college, Bill showed his boy a design for what would eventually become Plutonian's costume, and he told his son that he should call himself the Plutonian, short for piety, loyalty, utility, truthfulness, and order. Bill also came up with the whole secret identity wearing glasses thing that Plutonian would eventually adopt. Plutonian told Bill You really got my whole life figured out." And Bill replied, "Hey, you accomplished just half of what I've dreamed for you. Your mother and I will be proud in our old age." Plutonian, listening to his father, tells him, "Oh, not mother. She has a tumor. It's inoperable. I've been watching it grow." Bill, puzzled, asks, And you didn't say anything? You didn't do anything? Why not?" And Plutonian replies, "You always said we should put our concerns last." Do you guys know the subreddit Malicious Compliance? This reminds me of something that would be posted in there. Bill, he broke down crying. And a week later, on the way back from the oncologist, he lost control of the car on the freeway. And he and Irene swerved headlong into oncoming traffic, and they both died. Plutonian, he went on with his life. He went to school, he met Alana Patel, he formed the Paradigm and became a hero. Plutonian says that when he put on the costume, he was himself. And the world knew him exactly the way he wanted them to. And that left him only with one tie, one remainder to who he had been at his worst. And that person was Max Damage. That stupid teenager, all grown up now, the very first victim of his unrestrained anger. And Max nursed a grudge so big that even Plutonian couldn't lift it. Max would eventually become Max Damage, a super strong, super tough criminal who existed primarily to make Plutonian's life miserable. Plutonian explains that stupid son of a bitch never even realized how easy that came to him. Every time that he looked in his eyes, he relived that wolf boy shame. Plutonian wanted to kill Max, but what would he have felt then? Plutonian, though, he moves past all that. The trip down memory lane comes to a close, and Plutonian and his parents have finished their origin history lessons. Plutonian, he asks his parents to now take him with them. He says, "Look at me. I really am your child. I am a part of you, and now we're together. I belong with you. Wherever you're going, take me where I can be happy." Plutonian's parents do not believe that Plutonian deserves forgiveness, though, and they transport Plutonian back to the blackness at the end of time, and they are going to leave him there. They say that they are pleased they could grant Plutonian some peace with their explanations, but they are sorry. Just because Plutonian had an epiphany, it is not the same as absolution for his misdeeds. They say goodbye to their son and leave. And Plutonian, he floats in the blackness at the end of time. He floats and spins, and there is nothing. Eventually his body starts freezing, and he will most likely die here. But then all of a sudden, Cubit and Max Damage open a portal, and they walk through it together. And Cubit tells Plutonian, "Okay, Tony, you get one last chance." Incorruptible issue 25. We heard Plutonian's origin. Now we will learn of Max Damage's origin and his side of the story and his various interactions with Plutonian over the years. 22 years ago, little Max Damage, then known as Evan Cousins, grew up in Coleville, where little Plutonian was living on his own in the woods, and he built a reputation as the mysterious Wolf Boy, causing havoc and killing animals. Max Damage was the son of wealthy parents who were uncaring of him. On Max's family home one day, they came across a deer that Plutonian, as the supposed Wolf Boy, vaporized. Max, he was highly intrigued, knowing that this mysterious Wolf Boy was most likely the culprit. One of Max Damage's only friends when he was a child was the neighbor girl next door named Katie. Max thought of her as a sister in a way. Max and Katie went adventuring one day, and Max told Katie that he was going to set a trap and try and capture this Wolf Boy that was terrorizing their town, as he's figured out where he potentially lives. Max, with some rope, rigged some of the rocks and whatnot on this hill to cause a little mini avalanche when he yanks on the rope, thinking he will be able to take the wolf boy down with this trap. As it gets darker that night, Katie ran home for supper, but Max, he waited, and eventually he saw the wolf boy, who was little Plutonian, and Max yanked the rope and some rocks fell, but it really did nothing, and Plutonian, he flew into the air. He grabbed Max and tossed Max down on the ground hard, and Plutonian flew away like it was nothing to him. But Max, he ended up in the hospital with several broken bones and a full body cast. Katie, she came to visit him, and they shared ice cream. Max, as he grew older, eventually ran away from home as his parents were jerks and they disowned him. Max, he would still write Katie letters, though, over the years, telling her what he was up to. Although as Max slowly embarked into a life of crime, he would kind of leave some of that stuff out in the letters to Katie. He would lie a bit, not wanting Katie to know that he was a criminal. But eventually, he stopped lying to her. He just stopped writing to her altogether, out of shame. Max, he continued his life of drugs, guns, robbery, and crime, etc. One day, Max and his criminal crew stole a helicopter as part of a bank heist they were doing. And Plutonian was now an adult and a superhero out in the open, and Plutonian came to stop them. Plutonian, he grabbed the helicopter and forced it to land, and then he yanked off the door. Plutonian, he was in full hero Boy Scout mode then, but on that day, Plutonian saw Max, and he remembered Max from when he was a boy. Plutonian made eye contact with Max and said, "My God, you! Stop looking at me like that! Stop! I'm not a monster!" Plutonian, he crushed Max's hands out of anger, and he almost used his heat vision to kill Max then and there, but Plutonian was able to compose himself and stop. Plutonian, he just turned around and saluted the crowd and moved on, and Max, he was thrown in prison. Max at that point did not recognize Plutonian as the wolf boy from his youth. And as Max sat in that prison cell, he rationalized that in a post-Plutonian world where a man can go around doing what Plutonian does, he, Max Damage, must try and gain some sort of power. Incorruptible Issue 26. Max, in search of power, went to visit Modius, and Max asked Modius to help him get some sort of superpower so he can kill Plutonian. Of course, we know that Modius is secretly in love with Plutonian, and he doesn't want Plutonian to die. Modius replies, "Kill Plutonian? You're joking. Imagine a life without him." Max, puzzled, asks, "Am I in the right place? You don't sound like Modius. Don't you hate Plutonian?" And Modius answers, "I assure you, boy, my feelings run quite as deep as yours, deeper in their way, and yet, even the renegade depends upon a stable society, robbable banks, prosperous hostages, penetrable institutions. Ask yourself, would our comfortable status quo survive, sans its costumed champion?" Modius, he eventually comes around, though, and thinks, you know what? It might be good to bring in a new angry buck into the mix. So Modius sets Max up with a man named Dr. Origin, who will give Max powers. Of course, Max would have to pay for the expensive procedure himself. Eventually, after Max getting the money together, he was sent to this Dr. Origin's lab. However, Dr. Origin was too lazy to show up, but he got his nurse, named Nurse 1, to perform the procedure on Max. Max, he was placed into a containment chamber and bathed in a glowing greenish-yellow liquid bath. And when Max got out, he had superpowers. He was super strong and tough, although he would get stronger the longer he stayed awake, and his powers would reset every time he went to sleep. When Max returned to his fellow criminals and his crew, he told them that he no longer wanted to be called Evan Cousins anymore, which was his real name. From now on, he wanted to be called Max Damage. And Max's criminal friends all laughed at him, as one would do when your friend all of a sudden insists that he be called by some sort of other ridiculous name going forward instead of his normal name. Either way, though, Max had powers and he was ready to take on the Plutonian. In their first fight with Max powered up, Plutonian easily beat Max, tossing him through the roof of a building, and Max was sent to jail again. Okay, so Max's first attempt failed, but Max, he stayed awake in that prison for several days, and staying awake for so long managed to power him up even more, and when he was strong enough, he eventually broke out of the prison. And when he broke out, Max kidnapped Alana Patel, whom was still Plutonian's girlfriend at the time, and Max demanded to know the location of Plutonian's hideout from her. Now, Max at that point, when he was talking to Alana, had been awake for weeks, and he wasn't thinking straight. He even mistakenly referred to Alana as Katie, the neighbor girl he was friends with as a boy, who he had been writing letters to. Eventually, Plutonian flew down to confront Max, and the two of them began fighting, and Max actually got a good punch in on Plutonian that caused Plutonian to be knocked back. Plutonian, though, after gaining his composure, went back at Max and began hitting him and pummeling him. And it was then that Max finally recognized who Plutonian really was. Plutonian was the supposed wolf boy that Max remembered from his youth. He was the brutal, savage, mean boy who lived in the woods. Plutonian as an adult wasn't the Boy Scout hero, impossibly good to everyone that he really seemed. He was a fraud, hiding his true brutal wolf boy self. And finally, Max could see that for himself. Max, he didn't even try fighting back. He just smiled as Plutonian punched him in the face. And Max told Plutonian as he was getting his face smashed in, "I know what the wolf boy knows." And this really pissed Plutonian off, and he kept feeding punches to Max. And Alana Patel, who was still there, she began begging Plutonian to stop. And she told Plutonian that Max wasn't even fighting back, and he's killing him. Plutonian was still trying to be the Boy Scout back then, so he snapped out of it and he let Max live. Max, he continued his life of crime, and as the years went by, he decided to finally write another letter to Katie after many years of silence. In his letter this time, Max would be 100% honest with her. In the letter to her, Max wrote, "I do bad things, Katie. I've been in and out of jail so many times. I fight cops and heroes and commit violent crimes with my underage girlfriend. But I don't think about killing the Plutonian anymore. Old Modius had a point. If society collapses without him, where will we be? Plus, to be honest, he's damn hard to beat. Someday, some new drug will keep me awake long enough to fight him fairly without making me see the wolf boy. Without making me believe he is the wolf boy, because that is what I believe deep down, Katie. I know it's crazy, but I guess that's why I do this. Because if the savage wolf boy can pass himself off as an Eagle Scout, waving a cross wrapped in a flag dipped in vanilla, all in that insincere, condescending way of his, then it's up to me to show the world a good, honest criminal. And if that keeps rubbing Saint Plutonian's nose in the truth of what an authentic human being is, then maybe I'll have done something to change the world." And the final images we see in this issue are Katie, now an adult, reading the letter, and she cries, as she still cares for Max but is sorry where his life went. Katie then, watching TV, she sees the beginning of Plutonian's rampage in Sky City, which is when Plutonian first went bad and when Max Damage decided to change and do good. And that is the end of Volume 9. Alright, that was Volume 9. Let me go through my thoughts on this one. I really enjoyed the Plutonian origin stuff. How do you explain what the deal with the Plutonian character is? And I was fascinated what Mark Waid tried to do for it and his explanation for it all. Seeing the parents from this crazy alien world and how they birthed Plutonian, that was great stuff. I also thought it was fun seeing Plutonian as a child, seeing some of those adventures, seeing his dad that shaped him into the way he was for good, but also for worse. He taught Plutonian resentment, which was really interesting. So I'm a big fan of those issues. Now we had the Max Damage Incorruptible issues. I thought it was interesting learning some of Max Damage's origin and some of his history and how he changed over time and how he got these powers. And then we got to see that fight between Plutonian and Max Damage at the end, which was pretty exciting. Max Damage, he just couldn't fathom that a man would exist like Plutonian that would be so good. But then he learned that Plutonian actually had a darker side to him and was sort of lying to the world, and that sort of satisfied Max Damage. So I thought that was pretty interesting stuff. There was that whole Wolf Boy kind of thing in the storyline, which I didn't really maybe love that aspect of the story, but overall, I thought it was a pretty good time. Now, one thing though is that this is kind of the big crossover we have between these two books, and it is not that important to the overall story. And even in Volume 10, you'll see that Max Damage crossing over with the Irredeemable doesn't really make a big impact. And it's not really essential to the story, so I thought that maybe is a little bit disappointing in how the two books never really had an important kind of crossover over the two of them. Anyway, I'm going to give this volume a 8 out of 10. Pretty good. Thank you all for watching. And next week, I will be back with Volume 10, the exciting conclusion of Irredeemable. And it is a slightly controversial ending, so it is going to be a really fun one to talk about.